Hello everyone. I apologise for not being there or online in person for this, but I'm a little bit busy with some other things at this point. So I'm just going to quickly give a presentation on the Polar Research Diver Program that the Finnish Scientific Diving Academy established this year, and is the beginning of a new series of directions that takes advantage of Finland's lakes and how they can be used to develop professional diving and occupational diving. So the reason for the existence of this program basically is that we know that there's anthropogenic impact happening on our polar regions very significantly. Climate change, the heating, the reduction of ice shelves, and other impact factors. But we do need to send scientists down there directly to research, and some of that research involves going under the water and seeing the direct changes on these ecosystems and making actual statistically valid decisions that then influence policy and show what's going on. And for that, we need to have trained professionals. And sadly, there's a lack of trained professionals that can handle doing underwater scientific work in those sort of conditions. And one of the reasons for that is there's no very good training locations anymore. For the same reason that we're going to study those regions, we're losing the training locations that we could train people in ice and colder regions. I mean, 10 years ago at Suomenlinna Station, we could have run these sort of programs based directly in front because the Baltic froze in that region all the time. But now we have to look for other alternatives. So we created the idea of this a few years back, but then we actually implemented it last winter, and we created the Polar Research Diving Program, which is based at targeting occupational scientific divers or professional scientists that are working in or intending to work in polar regions. This is not a citizen science style program or an ice diving course or something like that. This is actually designed for occupational work, and you'll see why as we go through the rest of this talk. So if you can bear with me through that. So we chose the location because of our infrastructure within the University of Helsinki. We have the biological research station at Kilpisjärvi, which is a great location for this sort of operation or this sort of program itself. Basically, you can see it, the buildings there in the trees, with a major road that goes past it that goes and links to Tromsø. So it's only 2.5 hours from there to Tromsø by bus, and so you can get to this site very, very easily. We have accommodation and a restaurant, lecture theatres and facilities for filling gas and hanging out and drying dive gear actually within the station itself. So you can have the nice theoretical warm component there. And then we have, as you can see out on the ice, on the lake there, an actual site which we can use for the training. The winds and the conditions in this region are very analogous to polar regions. It gets extremely cold with huge wind chill factors. You can get a huge amount of snow cover, and you do have a large thick ice layer on top of the lake that they can then dive under. So to give you just a little bit of a taster before I continue, here's a video of the 2024 program and what the students sort of basically experienced. let's give you a quick insight into the videos from it. And what I'm going to do now is just sort of explain the structure of the program, just to give you an idea of how it was laid out and why we were carrying it out where we were, and its advantages to the polar research diving opportunities that developed from there. So there was quite an international team of participants. We had people from Australia, UK, a couple from America, a few Finns, someone from Cyprus, Netherlands, Germany. I think that's everyone. There might have been a few more in there. And our instructional team, which was myself, Pater Degerman, who's a well-renowned Finnish polar explorer, and Rod Budd, who is the Antarctic diving officer for New Zealand down at Scott Base a lot of the time, as the three sort of instructional team members, with a few other specialist experts that came in for a day or two. And pretty much right at the beginning, we took all these participants through, and Pater went through the whole component of being on the surface. So surface exposure protection, how to dress correctly for these environments, how to handle yourself in really remote expedition-based environments in these regions as well, because a lot of the scientific diving work that's done is not done just out of a research base. It's done way out where you have to set up base camps and you are really remote from everything. Then going through communication, first aid, different types of equipment, everything from clothing and layering systems to radios to sleeping arrangements and things like that. And then this continued throughout the next few days with more sort of practical classes. We also covered what was probably one of the most popular parts of the course, especially for those people from overseas, which was going through the snowmobiles. And we had a ice rally and snowmobile racing instructor from Lapland that came and taught this component of the program. Because of the nature of where the ice holes are and the fact that they're out on a snow-covered ice shelf and moving the gear around, we had to use snowmobiles to get to and from site with all the equipment. So the students went through not only how to use snowmobiles and drive them, but also quick basic maintenance, how to look after them, how to dig them out, how to right them if they've tipped, how to avoid tipping them, etc., how to use sleds. And that was all sort of a component that was added on just for the surface logistics. And both these components are directly related to the fact that when you're doing a diving operation, you're only underwater for a short period of it. The rest of the time you're on the surface. And when you're in the surface in polar conditions, it is cold, it is remote, it is very challenging. And so they were learning how to handle all these environments. That was part of the program. On top of that, there were, of course, theory programs. All the participants are qualified scientific divers in some form or another from their various countries and regions. And so they already had an understanding of risk management for an occupational setting. But what we covered more was actually the challenges related to being above and below the ice and how to deal with those risk management components for these regions. And that was then linked directly into things like how to set up a dive site, how to do supervision, how to run the supervision of those dive operations when you're up there, and those sort of sections of it as well. And this all was part of how to work within an operational environment. Okay, not only do you put divers into the ice, but you have to have surface support, surface tenders, communication back to base, use of radios, use of radio communication, etc. So this was all covered as part of the program. Also, we were out on the ice, so we were learning how to set up a base camp, putting up tents in challenging conditions, how to dig them in snow if you don't have pegs or things like that, how to feed yourself, how to melt water, how to protect yourself if you get stuck away from the tents or your base camp, and sort of survival components of it as well. This is just sort of an introductory level like component to it that's going to go through and be developed into future more advanced courses that will come in the next couple of years. So there we go. We set up our base camps, had our tents and everything ready, with our mascot from New Zealand. Then the students also had to set up the ice holes themselves. So we chainsawed up the ice itself, and then the students had to basically get the holes ready. And the way we set up operational holes in this environment is square ones. So there with the ladders that we've got built for them that they'll then put down into the ice hole. And everything cleared. Now you can see there's water layer on top of the ice. This is both a challenge and a convenience when you're doing it. We thought that based on previous conditions that the ice should be still pretty solid, and the conditions would be a lot colder than they were initially, but the water had actually warmed up already to about 2 degrees. So with the weight of the ice shelf out there and the snow melting on top of it as well, it's formed this sort of water layer on top, which makes operation around the ice hole a little bit more challenging, a little bit more risky, but also it makes getting in and out of the water quite much easier for the divers itself, because they have a water layer to sort of beach themselves in, which was unintended, but it's just the way it was. So the students basically had to remove all the ice blocks, get the ice hole ready, put the ladders in, put the screws in, and then use the ice blocks themselves to build wind shelters along the side from the predominant wind direction that they could then build into and around their tents and things like that to protect the ice hole and give themselves a more sort of established wall. You can see from there the ice was about a meter, just under a meter, with a snowpack on top of it as well. So it's quite thick and challenging conditions to do. But I mean, in Antarctica you can have up to 3-4 meters of ice to get through. So yeah, learn how to remove ice holes in those conditions as well. Next up, the students had the challenge of getting to and from the site. So one of the important things is you can't have the divers standing around or freezing, waiting to get into the ice holes. So before every operational period that the divers were going down, or the teams were going down, they would have a briefing beforehand within their team. They would assign who was going to do what. They would pack all the equipment appropriately, move it down to site, establish site. And you can see in the background on the picture on the right, the metal Zargus boxes that are there. Each of those was then packed with the according equipment and labelled accordingly each day to take down to the ice. The scuba equipment was taken down, site was set up, tender lines were all got ready so that the divers could then go down and get into the water as fast as possible. Obviously, working under ice, we have to use tender lines. They have to have that to the surface. And the instructional team on the left there is Rod demonstrating that New Zealanders are way tougher than Finnish in terms of tendering. This is a long-standing feudal joke between the New Zealand and the Finnish diving teams down in Antarctica. So it's there. On the right is Rod actually in his more serious component, which was instructing the teams in their tendering. And you can see where he's standing on the holes. So we had 2 operational dive holes, because if you're running an occupational, especially in Antarctica, you have to have 2 holes in the ice, mostly because one hole could freeze over. It could have something that obstructs it, and which could actually be a seal. Some of the Weddell seals will actually come up through the ice holes and then sit and breathe through them and then block the hole so the divers can't get out, so they then have to escape through the alternate hole. We had the groups to build a hole each, and then we used the alternate one as the escape route, but then was also teaching. So we had 2 independent teams and 2 instructors that were moving between the groups and observing. All the divers were then brought down to site and basically have to go through a whole series of pre-dive checklists before they can even get into the water itself, make sure everything's done. And each site had a supervisor that was in charge of running through all that with the tenders and making sure everything is done and everything is communicated back to base with radios. Once that's all done, the divers then descended into the water itself, and you can see the lights that are coming through the water there with the snowpack that's on the ice itself. Under the ice is actually pretty dark, pitch black almost, as you move away from the ice holes. And this is also good training if we're looking at people that are going to be working in polar winter conditions where they have no light, so they have to learn how to use their own lights effectively, which is just an addition to the task loading when operating. I mean, here in Finland, we're quite used to doing this if we're diving in the Baltic or the lakes, because it's pitch black half the time anyway. But for a lot of these people coming from areas where they've got crystal clear water, or they're used to crystal clear water, they're not so used to having to do these scientific tasks in the dark as well. So it's just added to the challenge as well. Then the divers will get thrown in, and we had multiple days in a row of diving operations. Each day, all members of the team got to dive and operate as site supervisor and also operate as a tender. So they sort of cycled the roles through the day. And then they would drop down through. They had various tasks to start with, just learning how to use twin sets for those of them that were less used to them. Others were just sort of getting used to being under the ice and the cold, and handling the cold itself, and managing things like free flows and shutdowns and stuff like that. The students were then also given scientific tasks, basic scientific tasks, not so much to carry out and learn how to use them, because that was part of their initial scientific dive training, but to learn how to manage with the tender lines and the communication of the tender lines back through to the actual divers themselves, the tenders through the tender lines. So they had to think things like running transects on the bottom in the very, very interesting substrate that we had in the lake, and doing things under the ice itself, taking ice cores and stuff like that, which is also work that could be very relevant to future jobs or future research. So they were given these different tasks, they were given out, and they had to carry them out within a team with the briefings and everything else as such. So this continued on through the weeks. They had different challenging tasks. Now, one of the things that is very, very important in working in these, or in any occupational diving environment, but especially in these sort of regions, is knowing when and when not to dive and being able to comfortably commit to those. And the conditions, as you can see here, can get extremely rough, where everything freezes solid. This is the last ambient temperatures of -20 plus wind chill factor, which was quite extreme on top of it, and it was causing a massive change to the beginning of the week, where it was only sort of -2 ambient and no wind. So it showed how quickly conditions can change, but also how to manage those. So we actually, straight away going down, as the instructors saw this day that we would not be able to carry out diving operations, but we didn't just cancel it. We used it as a learning experience. So the students then basically were let loose. They were told to go and carry out the task that they were assigned to do. And what we wanted to do is, at what point someone would actually go, can we dive? Is this safe? And actually do a larger scale sort of risk assessment on the situation. And that was part of the goal. Ironically, this day, like, they were clearing the ice hole every 10 minutes. It was refreezing over. So after a 45-minute dive, they would have definitely had ice cover on it. The safety divers would have had instantaneous free flows, and even the tender lines were freezing solid. So it was pretty extreme conditions. And we let them go all the way to the point where they were about to put divers in the water, and then we had a cancel all diving operations from HQ through the radio system, telling them there's a large weather front coming in and all diving operations have to be broken down and everything returned back to base, which was what can actually happen in a real life environment. You can be out in beautiful weather 200 kilometers from the base, but the base is actually suffering from extreme weather, and a helicopter cannot get out, which means you don't have a rescue chopper, which means you can't carry out diving operations. So it was a good learning experience in that. We were lucky we only lost one day through the whole program. Now, you can imagine that this is quite challenging. The days that we were running were probably 10 hours, 11 hours. Anyone that's been involved in a Finnish Scientific Diving Academy program knows that they are pretty intensive across the board. And that was also part of it, which was the fatigue management. And you could see as the week went on, people were starting to fall asleep or look particularly haggard in the evenings at random positions and places. They were just trying to catch 5 seconds nap before their next shift as it went, which is also part of the expedition lifestyle and management and learning. So it's all sort of contributing through to it. So overall, this was an insight into the first polar research diving program that we run. And one of the reasons that I'm highlighting it here and using it here is it's showing that actually we're using a lake in the north of Finland that doesn't have much in it and is not really related to polar research diving as a topic as a whole, even though there is diving carried out in the lake for some research in the summers. But what it is an actual platform that can be used to influence global polar research. We have a training location that people can easily get to. We have the expertise in country and through our network to bring like all these skills together to a location that can be analogous to the conditions that these people may work in, so they can get experience in a place that's not very expensive and not very hard to get to, but it's still challenging in its own environment while being there. And we have that because of our lakes, and it doesn't only include this lake. There are lakes all over Finland, obviously, that could be used for these sort of programs. We particularly use this one because we have a research station there, and it has a huge influence. Now, this program is if not unique, it's pretty rare to have something like this. Hence the international participants that came and joined. And it's been highlighted in a lot of media across the world. We had a TV documentary team that was filming for a future documentary release. We had various newspaper and video reporting from networks from all across Scandinavia and the Nordics come over and do it. We've had articles published in various magazines and articles in academic publications around the world, and it has been highlighted in New York in June at the Our World Underwater Scholarship Society, as 2 of the scholars were part of the program. And as such, we've had a huge interest from a lot of institutions globally to send people here to us to train for it. So if any of you are interested in the Polar Research Program and it relates to your work, both as a researcher or as a scientific diver that works with a polar-based research organization, or you're interested in developing skills to work further, it has a really, really good output from the participants that attended the program this time round. 3 have been to Antarctica or are going to Antarctica already to do research work, not just for cruise ship style diving, but actually going for research-based purposes. And 1 from America is basically left the program and went straight to work up at northern end of Greenland, up in the Arctic, doing under ice work up there. And the opportunities are there because the skill sets are definitely needed. So applications are open for the 2025 program, which will be run in March next year. It'll be a bit earlier, so hopefully we get a little bit harsher conditions for everybody to learn in. And if you're interested in the program, please feel free to send me an email. Like I said at the start, I apologize for not being there or online to answer questions directly, but if you have anything further to ask about the course or anything other details that I've covered, please send me an email or get in contact with me. And thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation and enjoy the rest of the seminar. Have a good day. Bye.